We arrived at the Grand Majestic for the biggest speech of our lives, only to be denied our room. But one manager's bigotry was about to trigger a corporate showdown that would shake the hotel's very foundations. The air in the lobby of the Grand Majestic Hotel was thick with the smell of old money and lemon polish. Crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small car, dripped light onto the marble floors, and the low hum of polite conversation was the only sound breaking the opulent silence. My business partner David and I had just flown in for the biggest conference of our careers. We were the keynote speakers. This was it, the culmination of 5 years of blood, sweat, and ramen noodles. We'd finally made it. David, dressed in a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than my first car, stepped up to the reception desk. He looked every bit the successful CEO he was, confident, composed, and radiating a quiet authority. I hung back a step, scrolling through our presentation notes on my phone. "Good afternoon," David said to the man behind the desk, his voice smooth and professional. "We're checking in. The reservation should be for the penthouse suite, under the name David Chanot." The manager, whose name tag read Mr. Henderson, looked up. He was a man who seemed permanently puckered, as if he'd just bitten into a sour fruit. He had slicked back, thinning hair and a thin mustache that looked like it was drawn on with a pencil. His eyes scanned David from head to toe, and a subtle but unmistakable sneer tightened his lips. "Chanot, you said?" Henderson drawled, tapping a single finger on his keyboard with theatrical slowness. He didn't even make a real show of looking. "No, I don't seem to have anything under that name. Are you sure you're at the right hotel?" I stepped forward, a flicker of annoyance starting to burn in my chest. "I'm sorry, there must be a mistake," I said, holding up my phone. "I have the confirmation email right here. Penthouse suite, booked for 3 nights, for the Tech Innovators Summit." Henderson's eyes flicked to me, then back to David. He completely ignored my phone. "Sir," he said, addressing me exclusively, as if David were an invisible piece of luggage. "We are currently fully booked. It's a very exclusive event." His tone was syrupy, conspiratorial, as if he were letting me in on a little secret. "We have a certain standard to maintain for our clientele." The implication hung in the air, ugly and undeniable. My blood started to boil. David, to his credit, remained perfectly still. His face was a mask of calm, but I knew him well enough to see the hard glint in his eyes. He had faced this kind of garbage his whole life, and he'd learned to meet it with an unnerving level of grace that infuriated bigots more than any outburst could. "The standard of honoring a confirmed reservation?" David asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Because we are the keynote speakers for that exclusive event. Our presentation is tomorrow morning in your main ballroom." Henderson actually chuckled, a short, condescending puff of air. "Many people claim to be important, sir, but our penthouse is reserved for our most distinguished guests." He looked at me again. "Perhaps I can find a standard room for you, and your associate can find lodging elsewhere." That was it. The mask was off. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a deliberate, racially motivated refusal of service. "My associate!" I snapped, my voice louder than I intended. "He's the CEO of the company. The reservation is in his name. We are checking in together to the room we booked and paid for." Henderson's smarmy smile widened. He was enjoying this. He leaned forward, placing his hands flat on the polished mahogany desk. "I am the manager of this establishment," he said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing hiss meant only for us. "And I have the right to refuse service to anyone I deem unsuitable. I will not have people like him lowering the tone of my hotel. Now I suggest you leave before I have you removed." "You've got to be kidding me," I breathed, utterly stunned by the sheer, unadulterated racism on display. David finally placed a hand on my arm, a silent signal to let him handle it. He looked Henderson dead in the eye. "So, to be clear," David stated, his voice devoid of any emotion, "you are refusing our confirmed reservation for the penthouse suite because you believe I am unsuitable." "That is correct," Henderson said, puffing out his chest. He reached for the phone on the desk. "Security," he spoke into the receiver, his eyes locked on David with a look of triumphant disgust. "We have a situation in the lobby. I need 2 men to escort a trespasser from the premises." My heart hammered against my ribs. This was spiraling into a nightmare. Two burly security guards began making their way across the expansive lobby. Henderson stood there, arms crossed, the picture of smug authority. The entire lobby had gone quiet, and I could feel dozens of eyes on us. It was a public humiliation, meticulously orchestrated by this vile little man. The guards were about 10 feet away when the grand, revolving glass doors of the hotel spun open. An elderly, impeccably dressed gentleman with a mane of silver hair walked in, flanked by two assistants. He stopped dead, his eyes sweeping across the tense scene in the lobby. His gaze fell on David, and his face broke into a massive, incredulous smile. Henderson's smug expression began to falter as the old man strode directly towards us, completely ignoring him. "David!" the man boomed, his voice echoing off the marble. "My boy! I was hoping I'd catch you before your speech. What in God's name is going on here?" The color drained from Henderson's face as if someone had pulled a plug at the base of his neck. His smug, authoritative posture melted away, leaving a slumped, panicked man in an ill-fitting suit. The two security guards froze mid-stride, their expressions shifting from intimidation to confusion. "Mr. Sterling," Henderson stammered, his voice suddenly a high-pitched squeak. What a pleasant surprise. I wasn't aware you were coming in today." He scurried out from behind the desk, attempting to intercept the old man, trying to physically place himself between Mr. Sterling and us. Mr. Sterling completely ignored him. He clapped David on the shoulder, a genuine warmth radiating from him that felt like a furnace in the icy atmosphere Henderson had created. Pleasant surprise. "David, I came to take you and your partner out for a proper dinner before you wow everyone tomorrow. But it looks like the welcome wagon had a bit of a breakdown." His sharp blue eyes finally flicked to Henderson, and the warmth vanished, replaced by a glacial chill. "Henderson, explain yourself. Why are my security guards marching towards my guest of honor?" Henderson started sweating, little beads popping up on his forehead and his pathetic mustache. "Sir, there's been a misunderstanding. A simple mix-up with the reservation. These gentlemen were becoming quite agitated." I let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Agitated? You called us unsuitable. You said you wouldn't have people like him in your hotel. You called security to have the CEO of our company, the keynote speaker for your conference, thrown out onto the street. That's a hell of a mix-up, Henderson." Every word I spoke seemed to drop the temperature in the lobby another degree. Mr. Sterling's face, which had been so full of jovial energy, slowly hardened into a mask of cold fury. He turned his head slowly, deliberately, until his gaze was locked on the terrified manager. "Is this true, Henderson?" Mr. Sterling's voice was dangerously low. "Did you refuse service to Mr. Chenault?" "Well, sir, I was only trying to maintain the hotel's standards," he whimpered, his eyes darting around for any possible escape. "Our clientele expects a certain exclusivity." David, who had remained silent through the entire exchange, finally spoke. His voice was calm, precise, and utterly devastating. "I believe your exact words were," he said, meeting Henderson's terrified gaze, "that you would not have people like him lowering the tone of your hotel." He paused, letting the quote hang in the dead silent lobby. "And then you ordered us to leave before you had us removed." That was the final nail. Mr. Sterling looked as if he'd been physically struck. He took a deep breath, his chest swelling. When he spoke, his voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of absolute power, resonating through the entire space. "People like him," he repeated, his voice dripping with contempt. "Henderson, let me tell you about people like him. Mr. Chenault isn't just a keynote speaker. He's a personal friend. He is one of the most brilliant minds in technology I have ever had the privilege to know. His company is on the verge of changing the world. And most importantly, Henderson, a fact that seems to have escaped your tiny, prejudiced mind, is that he is my honored guest." He took a step closer, and Henderson flinched back as if he expected a blow. "The Grand Majestic doesn't have standards based on the color of a man's skin," Mr. Sterling seethed. "It has standards of excellence, of respect, of decency. Standards you have just spectacularly failed to meet. The only person lowering the tone of this hotel right now is you." He pointed a single trembling finger toward the door. Pack your personal effects. You are fired. Effective immediately." Then he turned to the still-frozen security guards. "Gentlemen, please escort Mr. Henderson from the building. He is no longer an employee." Henderson's jaw dropped. He opened and closed his mouth like a fish, but no sound came out. The guards, with a shared look of grim understanding, reversed course and began walking towards their now former boss. As they led the sputtering, defeated man away, Mr. Sterling turned back to us, his face a mixture of profound apology and exhaustion. "David, my friend, I am so sorry. I don't know what to say." "It's not your fault, Arthur," David said, his composure finally softening. "Let me get you the keys myself," Mr. Sterling said, heading around the reception desk. He personally tapped at the keyboard, his brow furrowed in concentration. The atmosphere was slowly returning to normal, but a dark cloud still hung over the opulence. He handed us 2 golden key cards. "The penthouse is yours, of course. Everything is on the house. Please, this is the least I can do." He looked genuinely distressed, as if the incident had shaken him to his core. As he was about to say more, one of his assistants rushed over, holding a tablet with a look of extreme urgency on her face. "Sir," she whispered, her voice tight with panic. "You need to see this. It's from the board. It's about the conference." Mr. Sterling took the tablet. As his eyes scanned the screen, the color drained from his face, just as it had from Henderson's moments before. He looked up at David, but this time his expression wasn't anger or apology. It was pure, unadulterated dread. "David," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "this is much bigger than one racist manager. They know you're here. The board. They've just called an emergency vote. They're moving to terminate our company's contract with you, effective immediately." The words hung in the air, heavier and more suffocating than the humidity outside. Terminate the contract. This wasn't just about a hotel room anymore. This was about our entire company. This conference was our launchpad, our big break. The contract with Sterling's conglomerate was the foundation of our next 5 years of development. Without it, we were facing ruin. "What? On what grounds?" I demanded, stepping forward. "We haven't done anything." Mr. Sterling, now looking his age for the first time, ran a hand over his face. "It's not you," he said, his voice ragged. "It's me. It's Henderson. Word travels fast in these circles." He gestured vaguely at the other well-dressed guests in the lobby, some of whom were now openly staring and whispering. "Henderson's family has deep ties. His uncle is on my board. This incident." He trailed off, the implication clear. Firing Henderson had set off a bomb. The board, influenced by Henderson's powerful uncle, was retaliating, framing it as a breach of professionalism, a public disturbance caused by us, and they were using it as leverage to push David out. They wanted to kill the deal. David's face, which had been a mask of calm strength, finally showed a flicker of despair. I could see the gears turning in his head, calculating the fallout, the lost years of work, the employees we'd have to let go. For a moment we just stood there, the golden keycards to the penthouse feeling like useless lead weights in our hands. Then something shifted in David's eyes. The flicker of despair was extinguished, replaced by a hard, cold flame. It was the same look he got when he solved an impossible coding problem, a look of intense, unyielding focus. He turned to Mr. Sterling. "Arthur," he said, his voice clear and steady, cutting through the tension. "When is this vote happening?" "They're convening on a conference call in 15 minutes, Mr. Sterling replied, looking defeated. "It's a formality. They have the numbers. It's over." "No," David said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "It's not." He looked at me. "Get the laptop. Bring it to the penthouse. Now." Then he turned back to Mr. Sterling. "Arthur, I need you to get me on that call." "Can you do that?" Hope sparked in Mr. Sterling's eyes. "Of course, my boy. But what are you going to do?" "I'm going to give my keynote address a little early," David said. 15 minutes later, we were in the penthouse suite, a sprawling space with panoramic views of the city we were supposedly about to be run out of. I had the laptop open on a massive mahogany table, a secure video link to the emergency board meeting displayed on the screen. A dozen severe-looking faces stared back at us from a virtual gallery. At the center was a stern, white-haired man I recognized from business journals as Thaddeus Vale, Henderson's uncle and the architect of this corporate coup. Mr. Sterling made the introductions, his voice tight. "Board members, I have Mr. Chennault here with me. Before we proceed with this regrettable vote, he has requested a moment to speak." Vale smirked. "By all means, let the man have his final words." David leaned into the camera. He didn't look angry or desperate. He looked like a king addressing his court. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice calm and resonant. "I understand you're concerned about a public disturbance I was allegedly involved in downstairs. So, I thought it best you see it for yourselves." He nodded at me. My hands were shaking, but I hit the share screen button. For the past 10 minutes while David was getting on the call, I had been furiously working. I'd pulled the security footage from the hotel lobby. Our company specialized in data security and retrieval. Bypassing the hotel's firewalls was child's play. The video filled the screen. The faces on the board went from smug to confused to shocked as they watched the entire unedited exchange. They saw Henderson sneer. They heard him call David unsuitable. They heard him say clear as a bell, "I will not have people like him lowering the tone of my hotel." Aiko. They saw him call security to have a black man, their conference's keynote speaker, physically thrown out for the crime of checking into his reserved room. They saw it all in crystal clear, high-definition audio and video. When the footage ended, there was a stunned silence. Thaddeus Vale's face was a mottled shade of purple. David leaned in again, his expression unreadable. "As you can see, the only person causing a disturbance was your employee. An employee who acted with blatant, unapologetic racism. And now," he said, his voice dropping slightly, "you're about to vote to punish my company for being the victims of it." He let that sink in. "This footage," he continued, gesturing to the screen, "is currently being held on a secure server. If you vote to terminate our contract, I will consider it an endorsement of your manager's actions. And this video will be sent to every major news outlet in the country by sunrise. The New York Times, CNN, Fox News. I don't think they discriminate when it comes to a story this juicy. The Grand Majestic Hotel, where exclusivity means segregation. What do you think that will do to your brand, Mr. Vale? To your stock price? To your company's standard?" The silence that followed was deafening. The board members stared, their faces pale. They weren't just looking at a video. They were looking at the complete and utter destruction of their corporate reputation. They were looking at boycotts, protests, and a PR nightmare that would cost them hundreds of millions. Mr. Sterling finally broke the silence. "Well, Thaddeus," he said, a triumphant smile spreading across his face. "Do we still have a motion to vote on?" Thaddeus Vale looked like he'd swallowed poison. He stared at David through the screen, his eyes filled with pure hatred, but also with the bitter understanding of total defeat. He simply shook his head and disconnected from the call. One by one, the other squares on the screen went dark. The contract was safe. Our company was safe. David leaned back in his chair and finally let out a long, slow breath. The setting sun cast long shadows across the opulent suite. It wasn't the way we planned to start the biggest week of our careers, but we had faced down the ugliest kind of prejudice and won. The instant karma Henderson faced was more than just losing his job. It was the catalyst that exposed the rot in the entire foundation, and in the end, it was the very thing that saved us.